A special welcome to those of you who are not regular parishioners at Church of the Holy Communion. My name is Sandy Webb, and it's my great pleasure to serve as the rector of this parish, which means the senior priest. We have spent a lot of time at the end of last semester and through this semester remembering the civil rights events of the last 50 years and commemorating the martyrdom of Dr. King. I'm so incredibly pleased today to have this distinguished panel with us, and you'll be learning more and hearing more from them in just a moment. Our observances will continue. Next week, the mayor will be here with us speaking about the recent actions the city has taken to honor the sanitation workers from 1968, but I'll let him speak to that next week as well. Church will begin at 10:30 after this forum, and everyone is welcome to stay and to join us. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, you taught us to be people of memory and tradition, but also people of expectation and hope. Thank you for the new life that you have bred in and around this country over the last 50 years. Thank you for the prophetic words of Dr. King and for all of the people who stood with him and worked with him and marched with him and suffered with him. Thank you for their legacy. Thank you for the great gift that you have given us. Be with us today as we study and learn, and inspire us to go out and make change for your future. In Jesus' name, amen. It's a pleasure for me to introduce the person who had the idea for this forum and has gone out to do all of the legwork to make it possible, Church of the Holy Communion's Minister of Communication, Jane Roberts.
I am so thrilled to look out on this audience and see some of the icons of our city who 50 years ago were on the front lines of history in Memphis. I'd like to call to the stage now Reverend Cleo Smith, Baxter Leach, and the Reverend Leslie Moore. These men were honored at the White House under the Obama administration in the last year of his presidency. They also travel around the nation talking about what happened here in Memphis, what it was like to be asked to be dealt with as a man and not as boys or teenagers. And I want to pay special tribute to Reverend Cleo Smith, who's right here, who has been with the department 50 years and is still on the job. And interviewing the sanitation workers today is Otis Sanford. Otis, I am so thrilled to have you here. For a lot of times I sat with you in staff meetings at the Commercial Appeal. You were our big guy there, and you still are. I just want to tell you a little bit about Otis. He started at the Clarion Ledger, and so did I, Otis. And then he came to Memphis, and then he went to the Pittsburgh Press as the associate managing editor. Assistant city editor, and then to the Detroit News. Free Press. And then back to the Commercial Appeal, where he was led the newsroom and our coverage for so many years. He now is the Hardin Chair of Excellence at the University of Memphis in Journalism. He's a commentator on WREG, and he has written a book that was released this fall, From Boss Crump to King Willie, the history of Memphis politics in that era. And if you haven't read it, it's astounding. You'll enjoy it. So here we go, Otis. Ready?
Thank you so much, Jane, and good morning to you all. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for the warm reception so far. Jane is absolutely right. We worked together for many, many years. I may have been responsible for you coming to Memphis, I believe. I did some recruiting, and yes, yeah. I've done about 5 or 6 things right in my life. One of them was bringing Jane Roberts to Memphis. Thank you so much, Jane, for all you do. I want to be respectful of time because we have a lot to cover, and I am really, really honored to be here in the presence of 3 trailblazing men here who made history. Not just in this city, but made history in this nation because of the events that happened here starting in February of 1968. It changed the course of history in Memphis and really changed the course of civil rights history and the quest for equality and social justice in this country. Jane has already introduced them, but I want to do it one more time. Mr. Baxter Leach, Reverend Leslie R. Moore, and Reverend Cleo Smith. Let's give them again a round of applause. It is my understanding that Mr. Leach retired in 2005 after 43 years with the department. Reverend Moore retired in 2013 after 47 years with the department. I think that's right. And as Jane said, Reverend Smith is still with the department, celebrating his 50th year with the city sanitation workers. I want to start by asking each of you briefly to tell us how you got hired at the sanitation department, whether you were originally from Memphis or came here, but how did you get the job? And anybody can start. And use the mic so we can hear.
The way I got started with the city sanitation department, April the 15th, 1967, I went to work for the sanitation department. And I never will forget that particular day. It was so cold until we had to use a tub to put fire in it, to put it behind the truck, in order to keep warm, because we didn't have sufficient clothes. And I remember well that particular day, my shoes that I had on, that I had to go to work in, had holes in the bottom of the shoes, but I put pasteboard in the shoes to get to work because I was determined to try to keep a job to make a livelihood for my family.
Okay. How did you start with the city?
I would like to also say that, and also I want to add on it, we have 2 more 68 sanitation workers sitting in the audience. But I would like to say I started back there in 68, past 68, and at the time, we didn't have a union. And anybody that wanted a job and wanted to work for the city at the time could walk off the street and get hired the same day. Only thing we had to do was have a chest X-ray and a blood test. But I started back there then. It was cold, like Reverend Smith said, and your hands was aching, and your face was aching and everything. And I remember those times we made a fire on the back of and tied on the back of that truck. We had to stop for a few minutes and warm our hand because it was aching, so it was so cold we couldn't hardly stay out there. But we was men, we stood up. and we believed in right. We stood up and we fought for what we want. And there was a man up there at the city hall, his name was Mr. Thies. He was a great big man. He was white. And Mr. Thies would get on the phone. If we go down there and get a job, look for a job for the sanitation worker, he'll get on that phone, he'll call down to the barn. And our barn was driver sweep at the time right there, Danny Thomas and Crump. And he'll call down there, is so-and-so coming to work today? He said, no, he laid off. Well, get rid of him. I got a man, I'm gonna place him. Wow. Send me on down there, and I got high. All they had to do was go get my blood test and my chest X-ray. And I've been with the city over 47 years, and we lost a lot of our good men. And we stuck together. We were like a family. There was no misunderstanding or nothing. We worked. We carried on food. And I'm gonna tell y'all something. These young folks don't like to work, but I'm gonna tell y'all something. I'm one along with the rest of my co-workers. We love to work. We looking forward to going to work. Wasn't making nothing, but we just enjoy being with one another. It's a story long. I can't go no further.
And you're talking about Maynard Stiles when you say Mr. Stiles, I assume, right? Maynard Stiles, who ran the sanitation department for many, many years. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I got started with the city. And my wife, she worked on that my job.
All right. Yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Ms. T.O. Jones in just a few minutes. All of us have heard, if you've read the story, about the infamous tub of garbage. Can one of you talk about having to lug the tubs of garbage from the back of people's homes? Why don't you do that for me, Mr. Leach?
Yeah, we had to go behind the house. It might be further in that wall back there a little further, back to the street out there. We had to go behind there and bring the tube back to the street with holes in it, put up on a truck, and dump it in the truck on our head. Someone said it had maggots and water running out of me. I didn't have it on me because I told mine from the side. That's where we had to go get the garbage out. We had to go get brush up behind the house. We had to go get leaves behind the house. Them bricks, dogs, cats, everything was in them bags, 55-gallon drum. That's where we had to bring the garbage out to the street. And thank God that we got the union that cut all that out. Because they had to, for going back behind the house. That's the best thing they did when we got the union.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Yeah, just put it a little closer. Okay.
It was rough back in the day because we had to go back there. We had to take axe, saws, go back there and cut limbs out behind them houses and bring them to the street. We had to do all that. We had to go back there. We had to load leaves like we load cotton in Mississippi on them truck. We had to go out and tow leaves out to the street on them truck and load the truck with leaves on. And that was a blessing. We got the union. At the union, they cut all that out. And I thank God, we made it.
Okay, all right. Let me ask one more question before I get to the specifics of 1968. How were you all treated by homeowners when you would come onto their property? Did you feel like you were treated respectfully?
We didn't have no trouble on going behind the house. I don't think some folks called in and said we were peeping in their one and all that stuff. We wasn't peeping on one. We going back there to get the garbage. We had a few, because we went back and did our job. That's all we wanted to do. We didn't go back there trying to do nothing else. We went back there and got garbage.
Mr. Moore, what about you?
At the time, we had just got through with our route. And we told them, like the man said, we told them garbage on our head, but we had just got through with our route. And at the time, I didn't have no car. I caught the bus and went everywhere I wanted to go. And I'm sitting on the latest porch, waiting on the garbage, and just picked that house up. Next thing I know, here come the police pulled up. And I didn't move. I sat right there. Police come up there and said, "What you doing sitting on this woman's porch?" I said, "Well, I just got through working. I'm waiting on the bus." And the woman come out, I had my back turned. The woman come out and said, oh, I know him. Said, I didn't know he was the one that was sitting on the porch. Said, he all right. So I didn't hold that together. The Bible said forgive. So I forgive her. It happened that the police said, you could have got this man shot for no reason.
Oh, really? Reverend Smith, I want to come to you with this question, and I want to go specifically now. I want to take you back to February 1st, 1968. That was a date that actually starts this historic event. February 1st, 1968, near the corner of Quince and Colonial, not that far from here, two of your co-workers, Echo Cole, who was 36 years old, Robert Walker, who was 30 years old, were killed in the back of a sanitation truck. They were crushed to death. Tell me, obviously, I assume you remember that event. Where were you, and what were your thoughts after learning about that?
That particular day, I was south of Colonial. I was in the Parkway Village area. And the day that we got the news that those two men had been crushed in the back of the truck, we had to keep on working. We couldn't stop. And I thought about that thing over the period of years. It was almost like two dogs walking down the streets. One get hit by a car, and the other one just standing there looking. So that's the way I felt about that thing. We was just treated like dogs. I heard the news of these two men crushed in the back of the truck. Some little Caucasian lady, she was a good Samaritan. When they found out what had happened, she goes into her house, gets her linens, and brings them out to wrap those gentlemen up in those sheets and blankets. It was cold that day, and they was in the back of the truck to try to keep warm when the truck malfunctioned. But we had to keep on working. We couldn't stop working.
It was rainy, it was cold, you had no other shelter to deal with, and somehow or another, an electronic lever malfunctioned on the truck, and these two gentlemen, Mr. Cole and Mr. Walker, were crushed to death. Jane, our newspaper, covered it on the front page, so did the press center, but that was pretty much it. Not much other news coverage out of this. And that brings me to Mr. T.O. Jones, that I think you mentioned. He had been trying for years to get a union. And matter of fact, he got fired. After this happened, and the fact that, I want to go down to you, Ms. Leach. After this happened, and there were no benefits for the families of Mr. Cole and Mr. Walker, Mr. Jones is the one that called a strike meeting 10 days after this incident. It was on a Sunday evening. I don't know if you remember that. But talk about Mr. Jones getting the sanitation workers mobilized, and I assume you were a part of that, to demand a union.
T.O. Jones, if I remember the first strike we went out on, I can't remember, it was back in, I started in 1961, 61, late 61, 62 when I started. We had a first strike. Me and a guy called Willie Shield, we went out. I can't think what the name of that union was. We had to go back to it, called an injunction on us. We had to go back to work. Then after that, went back, I worked on it to T.O. Jones. Come to me, said, Baxter, we're trying to get a union. I said, okay, I'm going to be with you. He did, and I stuck with him. He come to my house. He wanted, if I had something that he needed, I gave it to him. And he come, and I go into the union hall, we walked together, we had a meeting together, and me and Joe Warren, all of us together. We had a meeting. Then he come and said, Baxter, that night, get your men. We will meet at Firestone Union Hall.
Right.
I said, I told my man that night, he said, Baxter, you ain't gonna get no union. I said, look, that's what we're trying to do tonight, get a union. I cried that night. It hurt my heart. They didn't want to stand up to be no men to help their family, and I did. Some went with me, some of them didn't. And I marched to Firestone Union Hall, and T.O. Jones said, Baxter, we're gonna overcome it. The only thing I hate about they did T.O. Jones, what they did him. He got the union started, got everything settled down, then they sent him away for another job. He got up there, he had no job. No job, he had nowhere to live. Joe Warren had to send and get him and bring him back to Memphis to come back home on, because he had no job. And that's the only thing I hate about that. Because that's why I'm trying now to push things for him, because nobody never mentioned his name. He's come to me in my sleep one time. Nobody said nothing about T.O. Jones. He the one started this union.
Right.
And I give him the credit and honor.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, at that meeting on Sunday night, February 11th, 1968, Mr. Jones met with several hundred of you and your fellow sanitation workers, created a list of demands, took those demands to Mr. Stiles and others in the city. They rejected them out of hand, just flat rejected them that night.
Sure did.
Came back to the meeting, and you all voted to strike.
Yes,
the
sir.
next day. Mr. Reverend Moore, let me come to you and ask you, the first day of the strike, I assume you participated in that. What were your thoughts about deciding, I'm going to take a stand today and not go to work?
Well, back then, the white folks did us like they wanted to do us, but we refused to take any more. There's a song we used to sing marching up and down Main Street, and we always sung this song, I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And we stood up and we decided that we would get some sign, and right on the sign, I am a man. And you better believe there was real men. They know when somebody was trying to make a fool out of them. They know when somebody was trying to do them bad and do them wrong. But they decided they wasn't going to take no more. And you know you can go so far, and you can take all the devil can dished out. But they got to remember, it wasn't a time picked that we wouldn't go out on those streets and whisper a word of prayer to the Almighty God. And God will free you from the slave. I thought about when Dr. King came to Memphis, I thought about that my mind went back in the Bible days when Moses led the children of Israel across the Red Sea. Dr. King kind of put me in the mind of Moses. And we had, and it was over 3,000 and some men that marched. And on that day of strike, we decided we're gonna go out and picket, walk the picket line. And everything went down the hill. But then when they heard that we were gonna go out in Chickasaw Garden, old Lou was the mayor at the time. You know about what time that was. And Lou refused to give us anything. But Jesse F. stood up. He was a short man, but he had a lot of power. Our union used to be so powerful. It wasn't nothing come across the table if we didn't know about.
Right.
Because we had some directors in the union that would let you know everything.
Right.
And I never shall forget, I'm going to say this in short, and I never shall forget, Jesse F. come down to the barn, Reverend Ralph Jackson came down to the barn, and all of the union directors came down. He told all of the men, went to made a driver to every installation, and told all the men, I don't want now man to go home. I don't want now man to take no bath. I don't want now man to drive your personal car downtown. I want every city equipment to go downtown and park in front of the city hall. And there was over 3,000 men that went down there. We went busting up in Lowe's office. Lowe hollered out and said, don't come here like game busters. Jesse Up told him to shut up and sit down. I got the flow. And everything. So we stood behind it. We had good leaders, and there was good backers. We backed it. Amen.
All right. All right. Come in, Mr. Reverend Smith, I want to follow up a little bit on what Reverend Moore was saying there, because you all took a bold step here. The city leadership criticized you. The local newspapers criticized you. The majority of the white community criticized you. You didn't start out with any prominent civil rights leadership when you decided to do this, although they came on board immediately, and you did wind up with some strong leadership. Talk about your feelings about stepping out there when you didn't have much support to start.
Well, I remember as well that when the strike was called, I think I was 24 going on 25 at that time.
Just a young man.
And when I heard about it, there was the gentleman that was working for the city sanitation department at that time, probably was my age, 75, 60, 50, along in those brackets. And they said to us young guys that y'all gonna mess our jobs up.
Yeah.
And we told them, said, no, said we gonna get a union. And when they tried to block it, as to where we wasn't able to get a union, a lot of them was going back in working. There was a store on the corner down on Beale Street called A Squabs. And a bunch of us young guys, we got together and went down there and bought some axe handlers. And we went back to our place of work, and we stood on that picket line to see who was gonna cross it. Didn't nobody come across that picket line because we was determined that we was gonna be men and not boys. I'm gonna throw this in and I'll be through. I was in Parkway Village one day, and there was this man by the name of Forrest Spencer. I guess he might have been probably 50, 60 years old. I was in one yard, he was in the next yard. He was about 6'6", kind of tall guy. It was in the summertime. And I kept looking at him, and he kept looking up at this apple tree. And I said to him, I said, Forrest, don't touch that apple tree. He said, I'm hungry, I'm gonna get one of these apples. I said, Forrest, don't touch that apple tree. He reaches up, pulls the apple off of the tree. This Caucasian lady came to the back. Evidently, she must have been looking all the time. She came to the back door. She said, boy, put that apple right back where you got it. And I'm standing there looking at him, trying to put the apple back on the tree. So it's a lot of stuff, we as sanitation workers went through. And thank God that the Lord saved us, we that's sitting here this morning, because there was a lot of animosity in us. Yeah. But thanks be to God that God took out that stony heart and put in a heart of flesh.
Yeah.
Is that what we was able to deal with people on whatever level they came to us on.
Reverend Moore, I want to come to you and get your thoughts after you learned that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been asked to come to Memphis to support the sanitation workers, and he agreed to do so. At the time, he was getting ready for a Poor People's Campaign to march on Washington, but he interrupted that work. Some of it was going on right down south here in Mississippi, near Marks, Mississippi, to come to Memphis to speak on behalf and to say that he would lead a march in support of you all, the sanitation workers. Give me your thoughts about someone at this point, you're talking about a Nobel Prize winner now, who was coming to Memphis to support you. Give me your thoughts about that.
Well, I thought about it and run across my mind that we have been marching and we had been working for many years, and we wasn't treated fairly. We wasn't given no kind of. I put it like this: they didn't have no kind of regard for us. But yet we didn't let that bother us. And when we heard that Dr. King was coming to Memphis, and we always said, and you know, Burroughs used to mention this at all times, Dr. King came to Memphis in the behalf of the sanitation workers because we had been through a whole lot. And we went through some things, and many times, all that stuff that we went through, and Lord knows we went through something. All that stuff we went through, I felt like quitting. But I said I wasn't going to quit. I ain't going to stop. I'm going to hang on in there. So then when we heard that Dr. King was coming in, my heart was to jumping for joy. Because number one, Dr. King was out there. Number two, he had a large crowd behind him. And number four, we decided we're going to fight until we got what we really wanted and everything. And I want to say this. If I ain't getting off of Dr. King, but I want to mention this in this speech. If Jesse F asked for $1 across the board, we're going to get that dollar. He wouldn't sell it for nothing else. We was going to get that dollar. Dr. King came in the behalf of us. After he came here, the devil got mad because we began to walk into the lightness. He said, let your light shine, didn't it?
Yeah.
So we let our light shine. We let our work speak for itself. We let our ways speak for itself. And we stood up and we kept on walking. We kept on marching. We kept on living and doing what we were sent out to do. We didn't stop for no anything. They wasn't going to handle us anything because we decided we wasn't going to take no more of this mess. That's the old saying they used to use. We wasn't going to take no more mess. And you better believe all of those men didn't take no mess. They stood up. They wasn't scared. Sometimes you'll get shaky, but we still stood up. We didn't let them see that in us. You know, as long as you got the law on your side, you ain't got to worry about nothing.
I hear you. All right, all right. I'm going to call on, just a few minutes, I want to call on a friend and Memphis attorney Charlie Newman to give us some more perspective. But before we do that, Mr. Leach, I want to come back to you very briefly because we know what happened on April 4th, 1968. There had been a march. It had gotten a little violent. And Dr. King was determined to come back and lead a peaceful march. They had to go to court to lift an injunction to get it done, but on the evening of April 4th, Dr. King was assassinated at Lorraine Motel. Where were you when you got that news, and how did it make you feel?
I was at home. when we got the news. And when I got the news, I thought that like I had done lost one of my father or one of my brothers or sisters or something. It hurt him. I started crying. I said, Martin, and he said, Martin King got killed. I said, Lord, how much? I said, I always said, if he had 20-something, 40-something before he came here, because when he got stabbed with them scissors, the Lord wasn't temper. If they say that little white girl told him if he had sneezed one time, he would have died.
He would have died, that's right.
The Lord wasn't temper for him to die there.
Right.
The only thing I hate about it, he came here. I tell them all, he came for everybody, not for the sanitation worker. He ain't come for they come for everybody. That means white, black, whatever the job they had.
Right.
He come for everybody.
Right.
God said he come here just like you sent for a father. Come see about his kid. That's what he done. He come see about us like we were one of his kids. That's the only thing I hate about it, because that's the best thing I hate about it when he got killed. Because he one brought us through it, along with two old John following in his footsteps.
Yeah.
Because I tell you, that was the saddest day I ever, when the president got killed. That was a sad day, because we were coming down through the alley. That's why they run out there crying that the president got killed. I said, Lord, we just stood there for a minute or two. That was, that's all we could do.
You're right. Mr. Reverend Smith, I want to ask you the same question. Where were you when you learned that Dr. King had been killed? And give me briefly your thoughts on it.
I was home that evening in the bed, and when I heard the news that he had been assassinated, the first thing that popped into my mind that all hope was gone. I just felt that there was no other help. But God intervened, and the help did come through, because after everything was over, we still was able to overcome the obstacles that we was confronted with.
Right. Reverend Moore, last question I have before I bring up Charlie Newman. This is now 50 years later. What do you want the message to be to Memphians today, to this audience, to this community? What is the message from what happened in 1968 that we need to understand and learn today?
One thing I can truly say, all that we all went through, Dr. King always put out, he'd been to the mountaintop. He looked over and saw the promised land. And all he wanted us to come together and let the dream live on. They might have killed the dreamer, but they didn't kill the dream. We can let it live on. I can remember in my mind, mapping back. Think about that when we used to go we couldn't go to the same restroom that the white folk went to.
That's right.
Could even drink out the same water faucet.
That's right.
That the white folk drank out of. They had two faucets, one for the black and one for the white. Couldn't even go to the same restaurant that the white folk went to. Dr. King came here and he made it possible that black and white can eat together.
Right.
Black and white can go to the bedroom together. Black and white can vote together.
Yeah.
Dr. King made all that possible. But it wasn't just Dr. King, and he was a giant. He had a voice like a trumpet. But it wasn't just Dr. King. It wasn't just the sanitation workers. But it was all about God. Paul said, in all of thy ways acknowledge God, and he shall direct your path. And you better believe we acknowledge him, because it's all about the law. We can't do nothing if God ain't in the plan. But if God in the plan, all things, not part of the thing, not some of the thing, but all things are possible with the Lord.
As, as we say in my church, that sounds like a good place to shout right there. I'm going to ask now. Charlie Newman was with and is with a law firm that was key. He was a young man back then, but he played an integral role in assisting with Dr. King, representing Dr. King at the Birch, Porter, and Johnson law firm to lift the injunction. They went before Judge Bailey Brown to get the injunction lifted. Charlie Newman is going to come and give us just a brief perspective on that. Come up, Charlie. Let's give him a big round of applause.
How'd you like to follow these men? As a very young lawyer, I had a very small role, really more as witness than as participant in this very moving piece of history. On April 3rd, in the early afternoon, I got a telephone call in my office from Lucius Birch, who was the senior partner in my firm. And he said, come on, get in the car. We've been hired to represent Dr. King. We got in the car and went down to the Lorraine Motel, which was then a place we barely knew existed. Went up into Dr. King's room. I sat on a bed, my knees almost touching Dr. King, who was in a metal chair. And many of the most important civil rights leaders of the time were in that tiny room, smaller than this area here. I had met Dr. King once before when I was in college. And I had been in awe of him all my life, my view of him that was transmitted to me by my parents. But I grew up, finished high school about the time of Brown versus Board of Education, went to college and law school during the height of the civil rights movement, and had watched very closely the courageous battle that was fought by these men. And you can imagine what a moving thing it was to think I was about to have a little role there. I think I sensed about Martin Luther King both times I met him, an almost a charisma, an almost physical, tangible aura of strength and energy. And I'm sure that was to some extent subjective. It was because of my youthful idealism, my feeling about him, and what he was doing. But I think there was something about it that was very real. There was, I think it grew out of the power of his convictions, their deep roots in the philosophical and religious tradition out of which he came, the rightness of his cause, the urgency of the issues that were so much before us then, and his extraordinary ability to express himself. But you can imagine what a moving experience that was. We, as I believe most of you know, Dr. King had come to Memphis a few weeks before at the request of Jim Lawson and some other local civil rights leaders and ministers to lead a march. That march had broken down in disarray. He had gone back to Atlanta. He said, I'll come back and lead a peaceful march. And the city had, in the meantime, gotten an injunction against another march on the theory that another march would present an unreasonable risk of civil disorder. And Lucius had been hired. He was being generous when he said we had been hired to go to court the next day, April 4th, and attempt to get that injunction lifted. We went back to our office, put together some papers, and the next morning went to court, federal court here. We spent the day in court. We had the law very much on our side, strong law in favor of peaceful demonstrations. And we had wonderful facts. We had as our main witness Andrew Young, who I was barely aware of at the time. He was quite young too. And his performance in court that day was one of the most eloquent I've ever seen. The city put on witnesses, mainly police, FBI people, who said that any kind of march would break down into disorder and would absolutely be unacceptable. Our witnesses, including Andrew Young, Jim Lawson, and others, said that they had conducted many peaceful demonstrations. They had methods that they would use, so many people abreast, parade marshals, and so forth. I think Lucius Birch sent out the subliminal message, which was obvious, that the risk of disorder, if that march were enjoined, was higher than the risk if it were allowed. We had a fine judge, Bailey Brown. The outcome was never really in doubt. We spent all day, however, going through the motions and procedures. And at the end of the day, Judge Brown announced, made it clear that he was going to lift the injunction. Asked us to come back the next morning to enter the written order. And we were walking back toward our office down Main Street when we heard sirens. And a man came out of a club that was downtown and told us King had been shot. So it was a very close, moving encounter with a dramatic piece of history. As you know, probably, the city, led by Mayor Loeb, had had plenty of opportunity to settle the strike. And shortly after the assassination, they did settle it, basically on the terms which were available before that time. Henry Loeb was also a charismatic man. He was a tall, powerful guy who had had the best education, went to Phillips Exeter, Brown University. And he was in many ways a likable man. He was hard not to like, but he was stubborn as a mule. And he got the idea that because it was illegal to strike, for municipal workers to strike, therefore he could not negotiate. There were people around him who understood better than he did how empty that argument was, and I think should have persuaded him otherwise, but he maybe had seen too many Western movies, too many John Wayne movies, and he liked to draw a line in the sand and take a strong stand. And it was a tragic mistake. These men have said better than I ever could what a critical point in history this was, and it was a huge privilege for me just to have a chance to be on the scene and able to meet and witness that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That was powerful in its own right. We have about 5 minutes or so to take any question that you have. Yes.
Hi, thank you for responding with us this morning. Is that appropriate, and how do you feel about that march?
Yeah. How do you feel about the march that's coming up? I think a reverse march is going to be from City Hall to Claiborne Temple. Is that right? Yeah, that's mine. How do you feel about this march that's coming up? Reverend Smith, what do you think? Get your mic there.
I think it's going to be a successful march. I'm looking at all of these faces out here that would probably come on board and march from City Hall down to, is it Claiborne Temple? Claiborne Temple. I get Claiborne and Mason Temple confused sometimes.
Yeah,
but I think it's going to be a successful march. and it's going to let the world know that we are coming together.
Any other questions? Yes, right here.
Not really a question.
Honor to be in the same room with y'all. And the second question I have is, how do you feel about all this attention?
Well, let me get one of you to answer the question about all the attention. I'm going to try to answer the question about what the national press has said. Go at it. What do you think about all this attention, especially 50 years later?
Well, I'm going to tell y'all something. Dr. King is not here in flesh, but his spirit is here. And spirit moves on. The work that he had performed while he was here for the sanitation worker, not only for the sanitation worker, but for the whole entire nation, for the whole world. His work is still going on. And all we got to do is stand up for justice, stand up for peace, stand up for happiness, get along with one another, especially get along with your family. Because in a lot of cases, family will turn into outlaws. And we don't want no outlaws. We want to stand together, fight together, live together, eat together, do all them good things together. Because together we stand, and divided we fall.
Exactly.
If you stand together, you're standing for God. But if you fall, you're falling for the devil.
All right, all right. Your other question about how the national media portrayed this and saying that Memphis killed King, I think that was an example of the sort of the geographical bias that Memphis unfortunately suffered at that time. I think some of that blame, though, lies on our local media. I'm proud to have worked for the Commercial Appeal for so many years, but I have been very outspoken, both in the book and in other writings, that the Commercial Appeal and the Memphis Press-Symbol failed to show leadership. They failed to see what this fight was. This was a civil rights fight. It was not just a labor issue that you could just sweep under the rug. And so in failing to show that leadership and creating and exacerbating the divisiveness, it gave this aura that Memphis as a whole was responsible for what happened, when that's not necessarily the case. Although, yes, the city residents, they share some responsibility in this. But I think it's all primarily because of this tremendous bias against the city that was aided on by the administration and the newspapers. That's my answer to that question. I think we got time for one more question, if there's one more. One more question over here. All right, we'll take the comment. Thank you. Before I turn this back over to my good friend Jane Roberts to close us out, let me make a personal observation here. I was in the 9th grade when the events of 1968 happened. I remember them vividly. They have stuck into my mind all of these years, and it gave me the opportunity to write about it. I have done a lot in my career. I've been a lot of places, done a lot of things, made a lot of success. But I will say here publicly today that I stand on the shoulders of these men who so courageously stood up when others were sitting down. They took a stand when others refused to do so. They took the criticism, they took the taunts, they took the abuse, and they stood up and said, I am a man, and I just appreciate them so much. Let's give them a standing ovation. Thank you, sir.
Otis, boy, you're a tall guy. Thank you so much for your rapt attention. My wish is that we would look at the men who serve us in our neighborhoods differently now. The sanitation workers, we know their struggle, we know who they are now. We have a small present for each of the men, and also we have yard signs at the back if you'd like to take one and put in your yard to thank the sanitation workers for what they did here.
Friends, thank you all so very much. Church will start in just 15 minutes. This has been a wonderful installation of a great, great series. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. And we will carry on next week with Mayor Strickland, who will be here in the same time slot. Thank you all very, very much.